you. All right, I'll call this joint meeting to order of Woodbury, Plymouth, and Monona counties, inviting our legislators in. Thank you all for coming very much. The reason we set this aside is that we thought as a board that there is ample opportunity for our citizens to reach us as supervisors and you as legislators on your own basis, but what they don't often see is a chance for us to dialogue together and observe that, and just a chance for us to present our concerns and our, thanks and our context as counties. What our format is today is, at least from Woodbury County's perspective, and ran this by the others as well in talking and setting up this meeting, is that we'll have a county-led dialogue on these topics and try to keep, to each topic one after the other. We'll just try and guide the discussion as supervisors, and then, to make sure there's nothing left off the table, we'll have a chance for legislators to lead. I know Representative Henderson has to leave at 4:45 with another obligation, and if anyone has that, no worries. Just let us know in your introduction. And so we'll do that. We are live streaming this. We're recording it as well. And welcome. There's a seat over there, I think. We cobbled together the best we could some mics, and as far as they could go, so as much as possible, try and scoot around. I know it's not going to be perfect, but if it's an issue, there are some extra seats up there. We have county staff, our budget director and our county engineer available if any of us have questions. Otherwise, they're going to just watch. So let's go around and introduce ourselves. Maybe if you're a legislator, what committees you're on, and go from there. So start with Don. And sorry, if you could turn on your mics so they have a little red outline, and then you can mute them when you're not.
Sorry about that, Matthew. Don Cass, Plymouth County Supervisor.
Craig Anderson, Plymouth County Supervisor.
Keith Raddick, Woodbury County Supervisor.
Matthew Long, Woodbury County Supervisors Chair.
Dan Bittinger, Woodbury County Supervisor.
Jeremy Taylor, Woodbury County Supervisor.
Mark Nelson, Woodbury County Supervisor.
Vince Phillips, Monona County Supervisor.
Tom Jennery, House District 3. I'm Chair of Natural Resources. I'm on Veterans and Health and Human Services and Health and Human Services Budget Subcommittee.
Jacob Bossman, House District 14, which is Morningside, Sergeant Bluff, rural Woodbury County, State Representative.
Bob Henderson, I am District 2 in the House, and I'm on the Transportation Committee, Local Government, Public Safety, and I sit on the Education Appropriations Subcommittee.
Kevin Alons, Senate District 7, which is Monona, good part of Woodbury, part of Cherokee, and part of Plymouth. I'm on Ag, HHS, and the Appropriate Subcommittee for that, and Appropriations as a committee. VA Technology, which is new, and it's Appropriations International Relations.
Bo Fox, Monona County Supervisor.
J.D. Schulten, House District 1, which is West 7th to Riverside, Grandview Park to Stone Park. I'm on Agriculture, Economic Development, Natural Resources, Economic Development and Technology, and Agriculture and Commerce.
Dennis?
Dennis Butler, Finance Budget Director, Woodbury County.
Mark Narrow, Woodbury County Engineer.
Thank you. Well, we have another state senator upstairs doing part-time security, Rocky DeWitt. I think we're trying to deputize someone to relieve him so he can join us, but that's just life, So just assume anything we say as supervisors he agrees with, since he was a supervisor for a while. We have an extra +1. All right, so we have 5 things that as supervisors, we'd like to discuss. And if any of you gentlemen would like to jump in, please do. I just want to facilitate this. I don't have all the material. That's why we're all here. As we start off on property tax rates, I know there's some pending legislation, some Senate files that regard this. And just to kick it off, I think one thing that as counties we want to communicate is that we're a function of the state, and we provide almost entirely mandated services. And the ones that we provide that are not mandated, typically we end up cutting those to keep our taxes low, such as economic development, or we utilize them for the benefit of other taxing bodies like the 2080 agreements we have from the county sheriff's office with the rural towns that do not provide their own law enforcement. So there is some concern with the assessments, of course, but what I think as counties we're concerned about is, at least on my property tax bill, only 19% went to Woodbury County, and we're providing the most basic and the most essential services, from a county jail to a gravel road system. And we don't want that lost on anyone, that perhaps if there is a reason that people are losing their houses due to property taxes and it's just too high, we follow your rules, and so perhaps there's some more definition that needs to be given to the services that are provided by counties, cities, school districts, and such, because we will follow the rules, we will provide the services, but as far as what services are tied to the property tax, a very fundamental, basic tax, that rests with the state legislature. And so, sustainability is one of those issues. I'll open it up. Supervisors.
Mr. Chair. Well, first off, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time and the sacrifice that it is to be away from your families and your responsiveness. I would just echo, I think the sustainability piece, if there's any property tax reform, can be really concerning if it's through the means of a backfill. And I think historically what we've seen is that the state has said, we'll backfill this, so any lost revenue the state has, so it appears to the counties, at least initially, like it's revenue neutral. The metaphor I would give is it's akin to the cable company saying the first 3 months are free. Sometimes, given the state's history, my worry would be if property tax reform is relying on a backfill, that's something that to me would be concerning. We've kept the levy either flat or we've lowered it for the last 9 years here in Woodbury County. But we have the constraints that, we're building a $70 million jail that was approved by taxpayers. We're trying to rebuild a gravel system from 1 to 2 inches back to a 5 to 6 inch base. These are mandated services. And so my worry is if we've been able to keep the levy flat or lower it, any mandate that would come down from the state that's either relying on a backfill or that would limit growth for things that voters have asked for us to implement, I think would be constraining. And I guess my last comment would be, it seems like it's easier when there's no skin in the game to say counties or cities should be limiting or curtailing. But if it was something like the state was reducing the sales tax, and that was going for property tax relief, that would be one thing. But that's my worry, is that it's easy to set what can feel like artificial limitations, if that makes sense. Thank you.
And I don't want it lost on anyone that we are appreciative that the state, provides rollback factors and things like that, which do mitigate the impact of property assessment increases that we jointly try to communicate to people with as much effect as we can have. Please remember to silence your cell phones. But it still is an issue because we have very few areas that are not mandated. And if we don't have that support from the state legislature on explaining to our mutual taxpayers that this is a state function, the reassessments are state law, the rollbacks are state law, we control our budgets, but the fact that there are assessments and reassessments, that is set in stone. It's not an excuse. The more support we have there, the more easy it is to have that dialogue with our people. And I know there's some third parties out there that kind of make us the bad guy and it's not your fault, and vice versa. But, the things that we have that are non-mandated, such as our park system, those are things we excel at, but they'll be the first to go if we have to choose between that and a state mandated voter referendum approved jail, you know, so it's just again, a question of priorities, and the priorities lies with the state, especially since we are such a small piece of the property tax bill.
Matthew, do you have any idea what the rollback's going to be? I've heard some rumors, but I don't know what it's going to be for residential.
I had heard from our county assessor estimates about 47%,
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah,
but that's not set until October.
yeah, yeah.
Another thing about tax rates and sustainability is we like to, as counties, I think, we have something in place already to incentivize us to keep the tax rates flat or lower them, and that's the use of our reserves. So I don't think there needs to be a concern that counties are looking at assessments and saying, look at how much we can raise by raising the rate, because we know that, you know, we have to communicate the same things you do, and that's why we build up reserves in good years and why we use them in tough years. And that's how we've been able to keep the tax rates flat, is we have that incentive already. We have no incentive to build up reserves. And if we have this decision made for us, essentially, then it kind of makes those reserves even less important, you know, less of an issue, less of a budget concern, and we lose a little bit of that power in planning our own long-term rates.
It occurs to me, gentlemen, and I know pretty much everybody sitting here except for Mr. Skolten. We've never met, but I'm pretty sure everybody sitting here did not get elected just so they could raise taxes on their constituents, just because they can. And the entire concept in Iowa of local government is home rule. And we are your eyes, Matthew pointed out, we are your eyes and ears, and we're where the muscle meets the bone in terms of the body of local government. And, you know, I see proposals where you want to take away our local options sales tax and things of that nature. And the powers that be in Des Moines fret over the surpluses that some of us have. Well, it's because we use those tools to serve our people. You know, Plymouth County has a very healthy surplus. Probably we need to reduce it a little bit. However, we have been able to engage in internal borrowing because of it, and it gives us a certain amount of flexibility that saves us money elsewhere. Local option sales tax. We've built a new jail, and then we represented it to the voters and passed again local option sales tax to fix the infrastructure in Plymouth County. We've got 365 miles of paved road, nearly 1,000 miles of gravel road, and the 5th most bridges of any county in the nation. Now, people don't realize that, but we have the 5th most rated bridges of any county in the nation. And that local option sales tax that our citizens voted to pass allows us to make a lot of repairs. And we don't know what we would do without it. He's been a supervisor for 17 years, and I've been one for 16, and we really don't know what we're going to do without those funds that we can fix the roads that people need.
Yeah, we've been doing roughly 20 to 22 bridges a year with our local option sales tax money that we would not be doing.
Yeah.
And when you've got 400 bridges to fix, and most of those were built in the 40s and the 50s,
Yes.
They're all worn out, every one of them.
Yeah.
And to take away the flexibility of a county to have their own local option sales tax is foolish. We don't need a state local option sales tax. Let the counties decide this. This is pretty simple. If you don't want it, the counties don't have to vote on it. I don't really need the state telling us how to raise the money to fix our own bridges.
And if we want to be cognizant of the taxpayers, look at Woodbury County and what local option can do for the taxpayers of Woodbury County when we have I-29 and Highway 20 traversing our county, bringing all kinds of people from out of county, out of state that are spending money here. We can significantly lower the tax burden on our residents because of the local option sales tax paid for by people from Nebraska or South Dakota or Illinois or Wisconsin. I mean, that is an ideal situation. And so the fact that we would even be thinking about doing something with local option, to me, that is not in the best interest of the taxpayer, especially for Woodbury County.
Now, is it true that that legislation's been amended to essentially grandfather in current local options?
That would be what, Senate File 550, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just,
Sorry.
I just want to say real quick that there's been a lot of different proposals. I think the House is currently working on one that I think is going to be unveiled this week. The local option sales tax portion has only been in the Senate proposals. There's not, at least in the House, there's no discussion of repealing, rolling back, taking over the local option sales tax portion. But, and so I don't mean to throw Kevin under the bus, but perhaps he could address those questions.
Now it's under the bus, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have, I've been reading through I've read through the bill several times. I've read through the stuff that they provided us and heard from Dan Dawson and kind of his, I mean, I can't speak entirely to, obviously they're focused on the two, they call it phase, let's see what they call this here. This is their verbiage. They're calling this Phase 2 property tax reform. So obviously one of the ways they're trying to build this or sell this is that right now you have 1% option sales tax that all three of the counties here have. And not every county, I guess, is actually using in state. And I don't quite understand. I guess it starts at 1.4 and goes down to 1.25, but obviously they're pledging, there's this, I don't think they use the term backfill, you're using, obviously you see it as a backfill that is highly likely to go away. I mean, that's obviously the primary concern, is that it's gonna be run at the state. I mean, what they're proposing in the Senate is that their state will take it over, and they'll pay it out at 1.5, phasing it down to, I think, 1.25 over so many years. But, yeah, I mean, they see it as part of a tax initiative, and I know part of it is tied to the Trails Fund and triggering that and trying to fulfill this constitutional thing that was passed long before I got there. But I don't know what else to really offer other than I hear your point, and like I said, I guess I'm not really sure where the House is at on this, but it's been some interesting discussions, and I've heard a lot of comments already from you all and other people as well. And it does feel like it's a kind of a rollback, at least what's been proposed in the Senate is certainly a reduction in local control, which doesn't seem to really follow, what I would argue is one of the tenets of the Republican Party, so.
Thank you. Well, that's all we wanted, just to hear our thoughts. Did you have something?
I think some of it's playing defense. If you look at local option sales tax, it was approved under the premise that it would be 80% dollar for dollar property tax relief and 20% for economic development. And so to us, I think it would be ironic if it's sold to taxpayers that we're gonna raise the state sales tax by a penny, but look, at the local level, you'll lose that penny there, so it'll be all the same. Well, if that penny at the local level was dedicated for property tax relief, we look at every instance where we can use local option sales tax in order to not burden property taxpayers. So it seems to me an irony under a property tax relief proposal that it would take away one of our tools. If that makes sense.
Moving to, I believe there's a Senate File 356, at least something our budget director has highlighted to us, and he has a handout he can give you shortly. I don't know how much time we're going to spend on it. Just hopefully hit the high points. But one of those things that jumps out to me is actually the next item on our list, and that's related to infrastructure bonds. A lot of county courthouses are historic buildings, and if you want to tuck point a building, you're going to have to hopefully pay for scaffolding once in our case, rather than spend $250,000 4 different times and bite off those chunks. So when I hear or see that there's any contemplation to lower the threshold from 1.2 to 840,000, that we have at least someone thinks it's being considered. If it is or isn't, please don't do that, because we have some critical needs that, let's say that the jail referendum failed. We would have to do a referendum technically for replacing a air handler unit. I mean, just based on how hard it is to get in and out of some of these historic buildings. And that's a reality I'm glad we don't have to deal with right now. But there's those sort of things that are going to come up in counties with particularly courthouses. And then there's a lot in Senate File 550. I'll turn it over to Dennis briefly. Dennis, if you could be brief and hit some high points of what's in the bill and.
Okay, the two areas I'd like to hit first is the homestead tax credit. Right now, the state is fully funding the 4,850 times the tax rate of each taxing jurisdiction. Actually, that's gonna be prorated and phased out and replaced by a $10,000 property tax credit for anybody under 65. Anybody over 65, they'll get 16,500, and that comes on gradually as the tax credit is phased out, the tax exemption is phased in. The problem with that is we have 18,900 homesteads, and if you take that times 10,000 with no backfill, where do we get the money? That's a big issue, and also anybody over 65, that means everybody with a homestead tax credit is gonna have to refile their homestead, all 18,900, because we gotta know who's over 65 and who's under 65. Because if you're over 65, it jumps from 10,000 to 16,500, again, no backfill. But then let's get to the bigger one here, when we roll back industrial, commercial, and railroads. Right now, we're rolling back the railroads and industrial, commercial, 90%. The state promised they'd backfill this years ago. Now they're gradually backing out to get out of that backfill. And then they're turning around increasing this 90% to 80%. What that amounts in a taxable valuation of loss is staggering. It's close to $423 million going back from 90 to 80 with no backfill. Take that 423 times the average tax rate in Woodbury County, overall tax rate, that's $12 million. How are we gonna make this up when you're putting a tax rate adjustment, so we don't go up so much, or assessment adjustments, it's 3.25, I believe, and it's something like 2.5 on the tax rate. How do we make this up? 12 million is a lot to make up, and that's all taxing bodies, so Woodbury County gets about 17% of that. In the rural, we get about 43%. But those are major items that are not being backfilled, and we need help. It's a lot of money to make up that we can't raise tax enough to begin to make up just those losses, besides everything's inflationary in our budget, union contracts. And we've used reserves now this past year to go into 23-24 budget, about 4 million. Now we gotta go back and either tax for it and find new revenue. But we won't be able to tax for it under these bills here because we're gonna be limited. And second, we can't generate new revenue. A lot of revenues are set by state mandates. So how do we generate new revenue? How do we pay for everything? It boils down to a bleak future if this is adopted for county governments and cities.
I guess the other high point I'd hit is that counties provide certain services for state government as a pass-through function. And, those are things that we just sort of absorb, in motor vehicle and other areas like that. But if it comes down to forced cuts, we're going to be looking to the state to take over some of those things that we administrate at the local level. And I don't know if anyone else here has examples of that.
Plymouth County maintains the driver's license registration facility for tests and so forth. We run it at a loss, but people expect it to be there. So we maintain it, but it costs us money. We lose money doing it. We have to have extra employees hired, but people want that service in Plymouth County so they don't have to go out of county, so.
I don't remember when the last time our
Fees came,
fees
yeah.
were raised. I think we get $5 a driver's license.
I think Hoover was president at the time. No, I mean, seriously, the fees are kind of ridiculous. Well, we get to get a driver's license renewal, we're the ones that have to hire the personnel.
Yeah.
It's kind of an insult, but.
Was there a bill to raise that rate this year?
There was.
But it didn't go anywhere?
I don't know.
I don't actually know that.
Yeah, there was.
I remember a discussion about it.
It was, I think it was to raise the rate for out-of-county people. In other words, people that would want to come up to Plymouth County.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same for Woodbury County, you probably run it at a loss too, yeah.
Yeah,
We get a lot of Woodburys because we do not have a
right,
certain time you have to come in, you can just walk in.
right.
We get a lot of people from Woodbury, but we still don't really keep that money.
Well,
It's wrong.
we passed a bill in the House that you would get that money. I don't know whether that's
I
gone
don't
any
know
further.
where that is now.
Yeah.
But
I
we
think it
did
was
pass
$10, it was a $10 fee.
Yeah, we did it last year as well.
Yeah, it was a $10 fee to be able to do that.
Well, the trickle down hasn't gotten to us yet.
Well, it's not law yet, that's true, for sure. It is something to follow up on, though.
Because they're gonna do the same thing with titling too, aren't they? You go to,
I
Yeah.
think so.
yeah.
And registration,
Right.
yeah.
Contiguous counties.
Yeah,
Title is contiguous counties.
So, yeah, in regards to tax rates, again, our county lines are perfect squares and rectangles, and the population centers are different, the topography is different, the needs are different, urban needs are more expensive, and we have to manage all that with a potential one-size-fits-all rate is sort of unrealistic, so, but is there anything, turning it over to legislators, that you think we need to understand as counties, as far as your process, how you look at the issue, anything that we should keep in mind?
I guess what I hear, again, just going back to state, and Jacob, you've been around a lot longer than we have, but it seems like the discussion is centered on.
in the legislature.
In the legislature, that there is this sense that the state has really tried to cut spending, try to control spending, control growth, and they feel like we have to put that pressure down. I mean, that's just what I hear verbalized, right, is that we've got to try to make sure that all partners, from the county up and the city up, are basically, and I'm not sure that the counties that are represented here are the ones that they're really identifying. I think there's, again, there's other counties that probably haven't been as disciplined in that process, and that's really just the sense I get, is that just trying to be fiscally responsible, trying to be making sure that there isn't just excessive growth in people's property. I mean, we're hearing from people that their property tax is rising, and that's the other side of the equation. I don't know if you got more to add, Jacob, as a senior guy.
This is my 6th year, and the number one thing, or the number one time, I mean, you generally will get a couple phone calls here or there, hear about different issues, and then all of a sudden when the assessments come out, I get 30, 50, 60 phone calls, emails, right away. So that is the one issue. And generally it's the same, that people don't understand, my house was worth this, and I paid this much in taxes, and this is what the local government needed to run their operation, and now just because my house is worth twice as much, I'm being told that the government needs twice as much to run their operations. And just that uncertainty, you mentioned it at the beginning, there's a lot of people who literally can't afford to pay $200, $400 more in property tax. So I think what we've been trying to focus on is just, how do we give more certainty to the property taxpayers, that they don't have to wonder, what is my property tax gonna be next year? Is it gonna be 2, 3, 4% more next year than it was this year? They can budget for that. And obviously, I think people have been looking at property taxes for as long as I've been involved in politics, 20 years, and haven't really come up with a solution. So it's a very difficult, complicated issue, because you move this way and it impacts here. But that, I think, is our goal, is how do we provide more certainty to the property taxpayer so that they're not so dependent on the assessment and like was alluded to by Kevin, I don't think we have an issue here, but there's some other counties, people who live in rural Lynn County or Blackhawk or other counties that are seeing, broad tax increases. So that's our goal. How we get there, I don't think we've come to a lot of agreement yet. You've seen even the big difference between the Senate proposals. In the House, the basic proposal was, the state would buy down 50 cents of the 540 levy, which would cost the state about $100 million, and that we would limit the growth in the amount of taxes collected by a local entity at 3%. And we're not necessarily married to any of those ideas, but that's kind of our basic thought process, is there's really only two ways where we as the state can impact, what is a very local thing, is either we can buy down some of it, we can put some money in to directly buy down the property taxes, or we can put pressure and limit the local governments on what they can do. Those are really the only levers that we have. So, like I said, there hasn't really been any agreement, or, nobody really likes any of the proposals that anybody has right now, so we're still working. I think that there's, hopefully in the next week or two, we're gonna have kind of a reform proposal, and I'm not exactly sure what that's gonna look like in the House, but then obviously there's proposals moving forward in the Senate. Are we ever gonna come to an agreement on either of those two? I'm pessimistic, but I'm hopeful that we can do something, yeah. But I just wanted to say that the reason we're doing that is this is the number one issue we hear every year, is property taxes. Income taxes, people would like to be lower. We hear that a little bit more. Being in a border community, sales tax, people tend to be comfortable with. They don't really want it to go any higher, but property tax is across the state the number one thing everybody's hearing from their constituents. So we feel like we have to do, at least try in some way to address that issue.
I think that, income tax is a big deal over here because we, face a state that has none. And, if you take the steps to get there and it causes property tax increases, you can't limit our levies then, because, we were looking at the math the other day, like if we were to lose local option sales tax, well, that's like raising the rural levy $1.50 per thousand. And, I think a lot of people, if they knew they were gonna pay, $1,500 less in income taxes to only have to pay $500 more in property taxes, well, maybe they'd be okay with it. But they need to have those numbers up front and understand that. I think in some ways, people would rather see sales tax be higher in this area because we get the sales from the region,
Yeah.
and people would rather, tourists come in and pay our taxes rather than people that live here. Especially anybody that lives on the I-80 corridor, they get plenty of benefit from sales tax. And I think they appreciate that more than, say, an income tax or a property tax. But, some of these ideas and proposals don't take into effect like calendar year versus fiscal year. And if we were to lose sales tax on a calendar year, well, that really screws over a county that uses a fiscal year. How do you make up for a 6-month gap? So all those things need to be thought about very thoroughly before any kind of bill or language is passed. And I'm okay with whatever you guys are willing to work with or do, but as a county, we're irresponsible if we don't come forward and say our concerns. And since I wasn't here necessarily at the beginning to thank you all for being here, I really appreciate it, because this is really democracy at its best, where we're in open dialogue in a room full together, and I appreciate it.
One of the discussions that I've been part of, and actually heard it in caucus too, is that is a matter of communication, not just to all of us who are legislators or supervisors, but communication to, and how we can improve that. And this is not anybody's fault here, it's just a matter of fact, where, a hearing might be held on some kind of an increase and 3 people show up, and it's going to affect everybody in the county. And how can we improve that? One of the discussions I've been in, just floating an idea, would be to continue a cap of sorts on property tax, let's say, but allow a county to increase that if it goes to referendum, which would require the county to do what you did with the jail, and that is to convince people that we need it, because and then have that sunsetted and some different ideas, but to try to get more communication out to our taxpayers so they know what's happening and what it's used for. I don't know if that's anything that can be solved here, but that is a concern.
Well, the unfortunate part, Bob, I think sometimes is a general misunderstanding on the part of the taxpayer in the first place as to where all that money goes. There's people think it all goes to the county. Well, no, it doesn't. Look at your tax bill. In Plymouth County, depending on where you live, it's about 23% goes to the county, and then there's the schools,
That's right.
the towns, and whatever, and the other various little taxes that go in there. And people really need to take a hard look at their tax bill and
Right.
how it's divided up in the entities that
Yeah,
are
we
getting the
look
money.
just look at one number.
So it's sometimes the communication that has to starts at home.
I don't, and I wasn't trying to assess any blame here. I'm just
Yeah, I
saying
know,
that's,
I think one of the challenges that you're gonna find is not too many people wanna vote for a tax increase. And so just having that in the first place, but one of the challenges that I would just put forward is, treating every county the same. You have some who are a 500-pound individual versus a 200-pound individual. So some who have been maybe reckless or more fiscally irresponsible, saying, okay, we're gonna start you at a 3% growth. And then you have Plymouth, Monona, and Woodbury, that I argue you have 9 fiscal conservatives here, who have been very responsible and conscientious. It would be the same diet, so to speak. And so that is just a challenge. I don't know what the exact solution is. The other point that I wanted to make is the state equalization orders that come down. Oftentimes we're blamed because not everybody understands how it works, but for the assessments, why are the assessments rising to such a level? If we don't, or if the assessor doesn't implement this, the state will mandate that we increase by 21%. So that would just be a challenge to think about in terms of, you know, Jacob, you mentioned rising assessments. It's the state that mandates this is why it will be that high. And so we're kind of in that conundrum, a little bit of a catch-22.
I guess to piggyback right off of Supervisor Taylor here, are any of you in favor of the federal government telling the state of Iowa how much they can spend? Okay, but you laugh, but that's exactly what we're doing here. And the taxpayers elect the people in this room, and they entrust us with the money. And if citizens in Johnson County want to spend money like it's water, that is their choice. And if there's someone in that county that doesn't enjoy living there because of the high taxes, they can move. We have lots of counties that are fiscally responsible and are answerable to the constituents. And I would say most counties have a meeting every single week where people do come and voice concerns, and their cell phone numbers are posted and their emails are posted, and a lot of them even I've had people stop at my house to talk to me. And that's accountability. And so I don't like this tone that Big Brother knows at the state capitol in Des Moines better what's best for Woodbury County than the taxpayers right here in Woodbury County. And so again, I would just ask yourself this question: would you like the federal government to set the budget for the state of Iowa? And if not, then why should we do that for the counties? We are all different. We passed a jail referendum in Woodbury County. Monona County, you guys did not. You tried twice. And that's okay. They didn't want it. And they had that right. And we talk about referendums. What's it cost to have a referendum in Woodbury County? Pat, 60, 70, 80, 30? But that's taxpayer money. We can't run around just having referendums all the time. You know, I just don't, I really worry about this. It's top down, and let the people decide. And a lot of counties have 5 supervisors. There's all kinds of seats that they can run for. They have avenues to voice concerns. I just don't like this top down, and it's not gonna work out the way that you think it will. Sure, we wanna curb property taxes. In my work with Farm Bureau, we've worked hard to get expenses off the property taxes into certain avenues that make sense, and that's fine. We don't want to end up like Nebraska. I've got all kinds of family that farm and ranch there, and it's a total train wreck. But at the end of the day, we still have to let the citizens decide what is best for their county, especially as things can change. A few years ago, I don't know that we would have liked a jail referendum, and they got to the point where we had to do it, and we did it, and it passed. So I would just ask that we have the flexibility, and that the citizens of Woodbury County and other counties have the right to have the county run the way they see fit, not the way that Des Moines sees fit.
We have a lot of different proposals, and one of them, what we talked about in caucus, really caught my eye, and I wrote it down. We need more revenue to fund the services that we provide, and possibly one way to do it is if we increased our property tax, or increased our sales tax, by 1%, it would reduce property tax by 25%. If we did it 2%, 50%. If we did it 3%, 70%, 4%, no property tax. Would we be willing to do that? I mean, but these are all the ideas that we're looking at. So I realize that you'd like to have an answer.
That all depends on your demographics. I mean, you raise the sales tax enough, and all of our property owners will love you. The poor people will suffer. The people that are already struggling. I mean, there's got to be a balance here somewhere. And I'm not opposed to raising the sales tax, but I don't mind paying property tax. I pay property tax on 1,400 acres and 4 homes. Do I like it? Not necessarily, but it's the cost of living here and getting the things that we all enjoy. I think we have to be very careful when you raise the sales tax too much to where the low-income people, that really tax them.
Well, this was just an example of what we're looking at.
I understand.
In a place like Florida, where you have a substantial amount of out-of-state income coming in because of the tourist industry, that would work. I'm not so sure it would work that well in Iowa because we're just not a tourist state. Nobody likes to see snowbanks and cornfields, but, and that's just the reality of it. Different tax paradigms work differently in different states, just like we got 99 different counties that are unique in each and in their own way. But I would like to bring up a revenue source. And Tommy, you and I just talked about this, but there's 73 wind towers in my area of Plymouth County that just went up in the last 3 years due to a law that was written in 1986 when it was assumed that wind energy would be Don Cass putting a small tower up to power his pig nursery. And solar panels likewise. I put them on the roof to power my local farm. That's not what's going on. Mid-American Energy now owns 200 megawatts of power generation in my area of the county, and the most we will ever get to tax those wind towers at the end of 7 years forward is about 27 to 30% of their actual value due to that law. Now, I'm not for raising taxes, but the guy that owns the car wash in Lamar's, Iowa, doesn't get that kind of a tax break. We're looking at this at Green Energy, and I'm sorry I haven't joined that group just yet. And probably won't. I'm not against wind energy. I'm not against clean energy, but this is industry. This is industry just like a coal mine or a lead smelting plant or an auto manufacturing plant, and it needs to be taxed just like those other entities without these massive tax breaks. There you can raise some money, and you can help counties like ours, because there's going to be another wind energy project, another, I think it's 200 megawatts again, go up in Plymouth County. And that's, it's unique to Plymouth County, but there are, O'Brien County, Pocahontas, you name the counties in that direction, they all have the same issues, and they could use the revenue. And we've got to fix the roads. I mean, those guys are going up and down the roads all the time with heavy equipment.
I think that one of the most powerful things you can do, legislators, is decide what functions are to be funded by property tax versus something else. This is kind of what we're concluding here, I think, is that, we talk about backfill, we talk about moving things to income tax. I would argue property tax, should be something that people don't hate to pay because it stays in their community. And because it funds only the most basic services. One thing I've learned since being a supervisor for 9 years is just how basic the services are that we provide. I mean, birth and death certificates. The list of what we provide is, when we had, a lot of COVID shutdowns, everything we do is essential here. It really boils down to, we would not mind if you identify something that needs to be taken off the property tax, whether that's from counties, cities, or school districts. But if you do that, it'll benefit all of us remaining as we explain to people, yes, your property tax bill is this, but it's funding the prosecution of bad guys. It's funding, a holding facility that's required by the state for a jail. It's funding, the farmer getting the crop to you. Those things are things I can defend all day long, and I think we can, all at this table. But when we get into the more exciting things, economic development pieces, different things like that, please just ask yourself, is this something that someone should lose their home for not paying? And if the answer is maybe not, then maybe look at a different tax, and we'll be able to communicate the county's position of this is basic, this is what we provide, other taxes provide something else. Yes, Mr. Schulten, if you want to toss that mic down.
Thank you for accommodating. No, I just wanted to first reiterate what Supervisor Nelson, I agree with a lot of what he had to say. Being the only Democrat here, presumably. I don't know everybody's affiliation, but, it's been difficult for us, and we mentioned about local control. And, I have 8 bills here that I thought of off the top of my head that we've stripped local control from, that has passed the House, or we're going to be voting. I think there's one that we still have going to be voting on. And it's been frustrating on my part, even though this is my first time down there. But we had a similar, it's not exactly the same, but with the multi-residential property tax rollback, which pitted up what we had. Basically, we had a choice to have taxpayers pay the costs or cities, and one of them were going to get screwed. And we offered, that's Democrats, an amendment that would cover the costs by doing the backfill with the taxpayers' trust fund, but that got voted down. So just we're working on our end in the Democratic caucus as well, and I feel your pain because when it comes to Mid-American and things like that, because what I'm seeing a lot from down in Des Moines is if you're a big enough company, you get your way in this state, and we're really losing out on economic development. I feel, because you look at the amount of, especially here in Sioux City, the amount of family-owned businesses that have been selling to private equity, selling to bigger, and I mean, I don't fault it. If you get paid, you get paid. But at the end of the day, if we don't address some of these issues, we're gonna run this state out of town. And with the worker shortage and everything, just we're exporting the cash flow in this state, and it's a big concern of mine. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question or point that I'd like to bring up. In Monona County, we don't have much industry. One of the problems that we deal with that affects our property owners.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you real quick because I know that Mr. Raddick has to leave soon.
Okay.
We'll jump back.
That's fine.
But his item he wanted to discuss was workforce development boards, and he does have to jut out of here quickly, so he's got a couple papers out. We'll come back to this discussion.
Well, thank you, and it's kind of fortuitous I'm sitting next to Craig here because we spent a lot of time on our local workforce development board together. It's been a process the last 3-4 years because we had a system that was working. Turns out state says, okay, we're not following the right rules.
We'll make it better.
Yep, we're gonna make it better, so we went through this.
Change it all and make it better.
We went through this process where, okay, they just told us we're gonna be in this new region, which that region kind of looked like the upper half of the green with the dark gray and the light gray up at the top, all of us together. It was something like 28 counties. And we were going through a process about 6 to 9 months creating that new region, and then a lawsuit happened that says, okay, we get to choose our own regions. So we worked together with other counties. We came up with the region we're in now. Went through a process, created a 28E, had this organization going, moving, having our meetings. And then basically somebody from the state says, okay, you did it all wrong, start all over. And at that point, as a region, we dissolved our 28E, said, forget it, we're done. From what I
The highlight was, after 2 years of hard work by a Cherokee County supervisor who was very diligent, he was former educator, and worked diligently with the high-paid consultants out of state and the workforce people. After 2 years of it, they said, well, we knew it wouldn't work when you started, but we just thought we'd just let you run with it and see you fail. That was one of my favorite lines from the workforce people.
And I guess, the state paid these consultants, and you didn't get what you paid for. People at the department, in my opinion, should probably be fired. But as far as I'm concerned, you guys can have it, take it over, we're done. We have no interest in running a local workforce development board.
There's 42 counties that have now withdrawn.
And all of them agree that they're done as well. And you may see other counties just leave it as well too. And I would say it's a major bungle from a department at the state, and there should be consequences at that level.
The only workforce area that has been successful is the Mississippi Valley. I spent 2.5 hours with them on the phone today. The workforce funding is based on population. Obviously, the Mississippi Valley has enough population, they've got enough money. They're thinking about throwing in the towel. He said there's 2 other regions on the eastern side that are also ready to quit. It's a top-down problem, and in fact, one of the regions that left today, his last sentence in the letter was, "Leave my name and number on your desk when you're gone, and I'd be glad to talk to the next director."
Well, and I just think one of the challenges we're facing is that we consolidated 3 districts into one, basically, to create the one we have. There's still not enough money to go around to even pay staff to do the job. So,
The staff that were mandated to do.
right. So,
One of the most interesting things that I watched develop was all 9 of these regions had to write a plan of how they're gonna operate. Our person who was helping us, which was through Gene Logan's office at Community Action, she spent over 100 hours writing the plan. Of the 9 plans, the state rejected 8 of them. And when we asked what the problem was, they said, we're not required to tell you. You just go back and rewrite your plan. Now, this is 800 hours of wasted time. When I was a kid in school and took a spelling test, they at least taught you how to spell the word at the end. They told you the right answer. This has been a total debacle by the state. Like I said, we had a Cherokee County supervisor that diligently put this together. When he did not get reelected, I called down to the workforce to introduce myself and said, it looks like this is gonna fall on my lap. And I had 2.5 hours of the most unpleasant conversation I've ever had with a state employee. I was told the whole problem is you supervisors are stupid. And I bit back. I asked her if she'd ever had a real job. The answer was no. So the system is broke. I think everybody that has withdrawn, all 42 counties, would like to see it work. I was with Workforce for a total of 18 years. I was chairman of our 5-county region. When it was operated out of Western Iowa Tech, it ran like a clock. I understand the problems that the Department of Labor had with how it was set up. They were concerned there wasn't enough oversight on the money. I get that. We could have tweaked that pretty easily, but between the Department of Labor and Iowa Workforce, our opinion didn't matter. So, and Keith's absolutely right.
well, and I mean, maybe this is a challenge for you guys to figure out here in the near future is what's a better way of doing this? Because what they've determined here, I don't think people want to be a part of it. At the end of the day, there's really no local control anyway. I mean, we kind of have a local board, but I mean, is somebody in,
We can't appoint members without their approval, and anything that goes wrong is the county's liability. And we have nothing to say about how anything is run.
so the only local control is for the mistakes and the responsibility.
So you said it used to work, I'm new to this, so it used to work, now. It used to work and now it doesn't, so you're saying that, what really changed? Was it just loss of local control, or loss of resources, or?
It's a combination of things. The loss of resources is part of it. The money that comes down through the Department of Labor, the state gets 25% to manage it, and then they give each of the regions 10%. They dictate how much oversight we need and that we have to employ people. It costs, they give us about half as much money as we need. And one of their solutions was, well, the counties can just throw money into this. It's not our program. I asked if there was any money that could come down from the state of Iowa. Oh, we're not giving up any of our 25%. That goes to our employees. So there's not enough money. Way too many rules and changing direction. After you get almost completed with what they've required you, then they say, you know what, we're gonna do something different. And like I said, even to appoint a board member, we have to, it's a balanced board, so we have to be gender balanced, business and labor balanced.
And political party.
And political party balanced. And when we finally find someone who is willing to step into this mire, it has to go to Des Moines for their approval. We don't even get to pick our own board members. I mean, we all know good people in our community that would be glad to serve on something that helps people. And this used to be a good program. When John Morrell went down, Western Iowa Tech got I believe it was a $5 million federal grant to employ people, to teach new employment to these people who had lost their job. Some of the John Morrell people, first of all, had to become literate in Spanish. They were illiterate. And then they had to become literate in English, and then they could teach them how to be a welder or a truck driver or something that was needed in the community. I think in the last 2 years, we've served about 100 people between 18 counties. It's a huge amount of money that is just being wasted. And the leadership is lax. Like I said, the region that left today, the end of their sentence was, leave my name and number on your desk, because when the new director comes, I'd be glad to talk to him.
But yeah, thank you again. I gotta run to work and.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. I don't know if you guys are necessarily looking for a response on that, other than just.
We're kind of beyond the response, but there's been a shortfall in the state. And I know Tom and we've talked about this many times. And you'll be hearing more about it because, like I said, 42 counties have already left. That's almost half of the state. I'm pretty sure there's 2 more groups that are on their way out. This has been like a Hail Mary for everybody that's been in one of these regions that, oh my God, we can get out. It's not state mandated, but it was a program that was good. It did good. When we had a catastrophe in the community, economic wise, there was a way to train people. It's a disappointment.
The consequences of this does fall elsewhere. The community services agencies, I'm on the Mid-Sioux board, and, this concerns them because they've got programs to help families become self-sufficient, and one of the tools they use is workforce development, or at least they'd like to have that available. So if they can refer breadwinners to job training, things of that nature, and now they've lost that tool. And the day's gonna come, I could probably apply for a job on Monday morning and have one by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, such as the labor shortage.
I don't know, John, I've seen your skills.
Even at my age. But the day's gonna come where you're gonna need that tool in the toolbox.
Are we good on this topic? I'm sorry, Bo, to cut you off before, so go ahead. Back to taxes.
Yeah, back on the property taxes, a couple things that we deal with that are a big issue in Monona County where we have the lack of industry. We are saturated with DNR ground in our county. And that number is going up all the time. I'm not against DNR. I think there is a place for that. But I think there becomes a point, and I just was down in Des Moines last week on a bill that was trying to get passed to see that the DNR maintained their ground before they acquired more ground. It didn't go through. We seem to have a lot of push from outside of our area to purchase more ground. Heritage Foundation buys the ground. They say they pay the taxes. There's some taxes paid, but then when it goes to the DNR, we're abating taxes. So that's not an honest statement that they're paying the taxes, but that is a big burden for us in Monona County. Because more of that ground goes, that comes off the tax rolls, and it's not just I live right in the hills. You can live in the bottom, you own property in Monona County, it's going to affect you. So that's a big concern that we have. Another big expense that we have that goes back to property taxes is when we house prisoners in the jail, the medical expenses and such like that becomes a burden of the county. We just had a discussion with the State Attorney General. She was in Ottawa last week and talked to her about what can we do about that. And her comment was, we need to talk to our legislators and get the laws changed so we can do something about that. But a lot of those expenses are waived, and we're stuck with them at the county level. So there's gotta be some changes made there, or some way that, I understand you can't get blood out of a turnip, but there are some cases where we've gotta have some kind of control or something that we can go back on. Getting back to the DNR ground, we've got young farmers maybe wanna stay in the county, but they're competing against DNR to purchase that ground. They'll tell you they don't bid on them, but I've been there, I've seen it. So that's a big concern that we have. I don't know if you guys have much of that, probably not as much in Plymouth County, but.
No, we don't have as much trouble, but there's some, but not like you guys have
Right.
down in the river bottom.
That's just another difference between counties, you know, is
Yep.
how much land can we tax? How much is even out, how much is the potential? You know, and how many houses are we going to raise the same amount of money?
Sir, if I might comment, if the DNR receives land and they use REAP money to pay for that, they pay property tax on it. Last year, they paid $1,222,126 in.
Correct, on 82,000 acres, but they own, I believe it's over 390,000 in the state, so that,
They don't own that much. The DNR owns 1%. I was on that bill. They own 1%.
14,000 in Monona County.
there's over 14,000 acres in Monona County.
Each county is different, that's for sure. But
Well, and some of that, there are some tax paid, is it the same as what I pay or my neighbors pay? Not necessarily. So that becomes a fallacy because it's projected, when we were down there in Des Moines, it was projected that we pay taxes. Whoever buys the ground, they'll pay the taxes just like what's been done in the past. But then we sit there as supervisors and those abatements come in front of us and we don't have any choice but to sign off on them. So,
may I ask where you got your information? That you said.
on the what?
Well, you said that there was no taxes on some of that land. Where did you get that information?
Well, off the DNR website, because now they have to report that. Previously, we had trouble finding that because we talked to our local assessor, and it's tough to target. If you go down and talk to our assessor and ask him how much ground does the DNR own in Monona County, it's tough to find it because there's different organizations that own it and such like that. But then they have a website now that they have to report that on a website. And the last that I was aware of, that was the most current figures that we had. So that's what we're basing it on. Not making up figures. Lived there all my life. I know what happens. I've been to auctions. I was just down in Des Moines the other day. They said DNR does not purchase ground, does not bid against farmers. I was right at a sale when that happened. I just found out about a sale in Woodbury County the other day. The ground was appraised at $6,000 an acre. They had an auction. Highest bid they could get was $4,000. They went to the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation said, we'll give you $6,000 for it. So to me, that's competition. That's competition against young farmers.
Iowa Natural Heritage, not the DNR.
Iowa National Heritage Foundation buys the ground and then they hand it over to the DNR.
Not always. Not always.
Well, they do a lot down our way. I'm not saying they always do that. I'm not gonna make a broad statement like that, but a lot of times that happens. Generally in Monona County, that's how that happens. And then depending on the dollar amount, depends on how long it is before the DNR takes the ground over. I've got thousands of acres right around me. And two of my sons have farmed that ground, so I'm very familiar with it. And I know how it is not maintained. I'm not saying all DNR ground is not maintained. And that was the purpose, and our thought was they should, to me, that ground should be the role model of soil conservation, different things like that. That's where that should start. But that doesn't necessarily always happen.
Mr. Henderson, I know you have to leave. Is there anything you'd like to, let us know on any of the topics? Just give you some time.
One thing that I would say. There's lots of discussion that goes on at the state level about making sure that we give local control. So it's, we do have to make decisions from a state position, but I understand what your point is, Mark, but it's not as bleak as what you might think. There is a lot that that is being done, and local control is a major topic in everything that we talk about down there.
One thing that I just say is, as these different, especially property tax bills move through Ways and Means, if there's a way to communicate with us, I'm very appreciative that you're here today, but to even ask, all right, what if we did some sort of reserve limitation? That may not be what we all would want, but I would give a perspective that, well, if you phased it over 5 years, that would be better than overnight. And I'm just giving you one example where if there's other things that just having that open dialogue would be helpful to say, how does this work or what would be the repercussions? I think that'd be really helpful going forward.
Anyone have anything else on the first subject of property tax rates? Can move on. Okay. I think we touched on infrastructure bonds. That was really the point there, is historic infrastructure takes a lot of, it's a big thing to bite off, but you got to do it at some point or you're going to have to replace a courthouse.
And unfortunately, things cost more all the time.
Well said.
It's just the reality of it, and so we should almost be looking at growing this cap and not shrinking it. We did the gas tax for the state of Iowa. Why? Because the old gas tax didn't have near the buying power of what we needed to keep the roads in decent shape, and that's kind of what we're looking at too with some of the building projects that we would like to do. What we could have built for $1.2 million 10 or 15 years ago is half or a third of what we could build today. And so to go backwards on that is really regressive. So that's my comment on that.
And if I may comment, going back to the wind towers, so we've established a TIF area for all the 73 wind towers. So allows us to capture all that to fix, and we're gonna fix roads with it. So to give you some example, going back to where I told you that 27 to 30% is all the valuation we'll ever get to tax. So over the 20 years of that tax increment financing time period, the most we'll ever get to collect is $23.5 million. L14, which is the highway runs east of Remsen from Highway 3 to the Sioux County line, is gonna cost us $11.5 million in today's money. That's the impact of that tax break and the potential that we could have for those. If they were taxed at a fair rate, we could fix a lot more infrastructure in that area where we allowed to do that. So as a side note, don't let them monkey too much with TIF, if at all, because our counties use that substantially to get things fixed. It allows us to issue bonds for the purposes of fixing our infrastructure. It helps us lock in a price for those repairs because the cost of fixing the road isn't gonna go down anytime soon. It's another tool in our local control toolbox that somebody tries to mess with it every year with tax increment financing. And, again, it's a local control, home rule tool in the toolbox.
All right. Next item we have here is on voter options. Probably won't take too long on this one. The overarching point is just if you give voters a chance to choose different plans on elections, they have that choice already. If you're going to force them to choose one, it's kind of hard for us to communicate. Also, in regards to the special elections being on or off the table, as far as forcing them, that costs, money from the auditor's office. And if the community is okay with what the special commission or the board chooses, then, leave it to the community to then force the special election, which is an option you put in. So if you want to reduce that threshold, go ahead to make it easier to do that. But if there's, I'm just thinking, obviously, we had a recent case where, we have a supervisor that's, appointed and also other elected officials. And just to have that taken away is a cost.
I would just echo, as you may know, Woodbury County is in a unique plan where 5 supervisors live in geographically disparate areas, but every voter gets to decide. And it's Woodbury County voters who decided that. So when we see legislation that's kind of goofy and it says anybody with a population of over 68,000 and include these 8 or 9 counties shall adopt this plan, to me, that's kind of the mantra that we've been talking about. That takes away local control. If there's a county where they want that, that county should have the autonomy to do it. But by trying to solve that county's problem, by saying, we'll do this at the state legislative level because you can't get it done at the local level, well, that's where their problem rests, and we shouldn't be rolled up into it. I think we've spoken to a few of you, and just would be appreciative of our 105,000 some odd voters being able to decide that rather than, again, Des Moines.
Yeah, I know this is an issue that's come up, I think, about every year that I've been there, and I think it comes from a certain number of counties where they feel like the majority is kind of snuffing out the voice of the minority. And one example, and it might give you trouble, I would use is, maybe like in Johnson County. The argument is they're getting too large to have at-large representation, where the people in the urban areas can decide that they want the representation in the urban areas, and they're choosing not to change it, even though the people in the rural areas don't have representation. So I think I agree with sort of the push behind it, that some counties, when they get too large, just don't function correctly when they have entirely at-large representation. I think at one point, Johnson County had all 5 supervisors living within blocks of each other. Well, that has a whole part of a very large county that doesn't have the same type of representation. But the reason I think that this has always had issues and hasn't passed is people like me have always tried to push for Plan 2 works, and I think this is an example of that, where you have kind of that hybrid if you're elected at large, but you still have to live in and represent those districts that you live in. And so I think that while I might agree with the premise that at-large representation is hard when you get to a very, very large county, I think that they need to accept that Plan 2 kind of solves that problem as well. And I've always been opposed to the plan that has forced the large counties to just go to Plan 3. But if it was requiring that if you get over a certain size, you have to adopt either Plan 2 or Plan 3, I would be all for that. And I think that just gets at, when you get so large, you need to maybe be focused on, because I think a supervisor district in Polk County is probably bigger than a lot of counties, in general. So there becomes a point where it's hard to represent a county at large when the county gets so big. But at the same time, I think that they need Plan 2, because it is a little bit rare. A lot of people forget about it. It kind of gets lost. But I think it works for especially a lot of the more mid to large Potawatomi, Woodbury. I think it works very well.
The point was explained, obviously, in the Senate. That's where it came from. And, they'd set this, by the time we got to the floor, it was the threshold, I think it was 60 or whatever, 68, I can't remember what it was, but obviously that was going to have a significant impact on Woodbury. And so myself and Rocky both, and I think a few others really weighed in on that. And in the end, they did, obviously they made some changes. They at least raised the threshold. And because when it was initially explained, they were really not addressing the fact that option 2 is going to be fully eliminated. And I'm like, that just seems like, it didn't make sense to me either. And I agree with Jacob on that. So.
And to that point, no voter or constituents ever said, well, which district am I in? Am I supposed to talk to you, or am I supposed to talk to super? 99% of people don't know, but they do know that they get to choose across the board, all 5. And I think that's something they should have the right to if they so choose.
Yeah.
But appreciate of your support of it.
Yeah, to Jacob's point, though, I mean, I think like a Johnson County is the most acute example. It's like, well, they should just be able to fix it themselves. But it is one of those things where I don't think they can, because
Thank you, Mr.
once they're
Anderson.
set up there, they have, there is no way probably for the county. So, I mean, trying to establish a framework is really the ideal, but.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it would be obviously a little less disruptive if there was already in place triggers like that. You reach this, you know what you're getting and understand you have to set that line at some point. But, you know, it comes with, I guess, an unintended consequence when you look at all counties, and I don't know what the population cutoff is. But, you know, as Jeremy said, you know, I've never had someone say that. I mean, they normally say something like, if they bring it up, you know, I don't know what district I'm in, but I'm gonna call you anyway, you know, because they know, you know, you're gonna respond to them, you know, and if they don't get through with you, there's 4 others that are gonna call in our county, and, you know, works out well. All right, Mr. Bittinger, did you have anything you want to add on any of these before we move forward?
Not yet.
All right.
I'll let you know.
All right. Anyone else before we move on to the last item? All right, pipelines. The county question, I guess, is what's the plan here? There's been some bills, some didn't proceed. People come to us. I know they come to you, but they come to us every week. And it's a little tough to say, we don't know. Some other counties are suing. We're going to see what happens. We're powerless. I don't know what the threshold is. I don't know what it should, you know, I'm not sure where the state's at. You know, is it really a priority? Is there, you know, help us out. How do we, you know, what is the plan? Is that a fair summation?
I'd love to hear the answer to it.
Yeah.
Good question, Jerry. Matthew?
Well, I think we were fairly clear in the House, we passed a bill overwhelmingly. And the reason I thought that was kind of the sweet spot was we're keeping the existing process in place. You know, eminent domain is not a guarantee, you have to go through a process. We're just saying you can't even start that process until 90% of the affected people want to enter into this sort of agreement. And then even then, it's not a guarantee. We think that that's a pretty good threshold, where you're saying before we're gonna even talk about forcing these 10% of people to do something they might not want, you have to have 90% of people that are on board. We were told pretty much right after that passed that it wasn't going anywhere in the Senate. They had no interest in bringing up anything related to this. I've just heard recently that Senator Whitfer has said that conversations are still ongoing. So I was going to say cautiously optimistic, but not really. I mean, somewhat hopeful, but I don't anticipate. I'd be shocked if there was something that went through the Senate, but at least it's nice to know that maybe the conversation isn't completely dead. I also think that we need to separate the conversation. There's a lot of people that are anti this project, and I think that the conversation needs to be about eminent domain, and this is a very serious thing when you're talking about taking somebody's land away. And when, in general, whether we're talking about pipelines or electric transmission or natural gas or anything, when is that appropriate and when is it not? And I think that's the larger conversation we want to have in the House. And at least up to this point, the Senate doesn't seem interested in having that conversation.
Why 90 instead of 95%, for instance, and does the state consider this a public utility?
I mean, that conversation, I think, is a decision that the Iowa Utility Board, you know, would make. We're just telling them in the current process, you can't start that process until you reach. The 90% was a compromise between some people that wanted 100% that would essentially, you know, do away with the eminent domain discussion, and other people that were at 75%, and 90% was kind of the compromise that was reached that most people in our caucus felt comfortable with.
Mr. Taylor?
I guess one thing that's disconcerting, and it's none of your fault, I think in some ways this cake is already baked, but you're talking about 3 people who sit on the IUB that are unelected, and it just takes 2. That's a huge amount of power on the part of unelected people who were appointed in a way that, again, that cake is probably already baked. And so as elected representatives and senators, numbering 150, representing 3 million people, I would like to see, and I think our counties have signaled, we would like to see action. And it's disappointing, and that's not the point blaming anybody in the room. It's disappointing to see that one chamber may not take up what I think is a vast and overwhelming majority of the people's will on an issue. So whether that perspective is helpful or not.
And I would just like to comment that it was interesting, you said that, you kind of have the people against the pipeline just in general, then you have the people that are against the eminent domain part. And I think when you talk to a lot of these people that are against the pipeline, regardless, a lot of it stems from how these companies have treated farmers in the past and in other states, other areas. I was at the assessors meeting last night, and a friend of mine that farms up by Elk Point but owns land in Woodbury, Plymouth County, was talking to me afterwards, and he had in South Dakota, but natural gas pipeline eminent domained his property 2 years ago, and there's now a trench all the way across his field that he 2 feet deep that he cannot go across, and he's been talking to the company for 2 years and has been able to get nothing done. And this is someone who has cared, his son is my age, and so this is someone who's cared for the land his whole life. And at no choice of his, the government said, yeah, we're going to let you come in and put this pipeline here. And now they have made no reparations to him. And you've seen that with just not only natural gas, with XL. And not to make a comment on what these pipeline companies could potentially do, it's just that we have let these other companies do so much harm in the past, and the recourse for landowners to try to file complaints against these pipeline companies or try to get damages has been archaic and extremely hard and extremely expensive for so long that a lot of these people feel like, no, we just got to stop this because they're just going to run over us. So I think that there are things you guys can do that kind of help squash or give people some hope on that end that they're going to be taken care of if eminent domain is given, that their land can be restored and that the proper procedures and things can be done. But on the eminent domain level, I've seen some of the proponents of the pipelines talk about, well, we've got so many people signed up, so then that means they're supportive. I had a constituent of Woodbury County that is signed up that I ran into last weekend that said, hey, we're signed up. It went through our land. Our house isn't near it. None of our neighbors' homes are near it, so we're fine with it. But keep pushing on this eminent domain. If our neighbor doesn't want to do it, they should have to. And so I don't fall for this guise that, oh, well, because these people are signed up, they are all for the project no matter what, because they're not. There are plenty of people who have signed up because it fits, their particular situation or land, but they absolutely are opposed to eminent domain on this project. So I just wanted to point that out and make sure that was clear to you guys, so.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, like, kind of our perspective of it. In kind of the weirdness of this, I actually quoted Steve King on the floor. So ultimately, I voted for the 90%, but it didn't matter, because what ultimately is going to matter is what Supervisor Taylor mentioned, is it's the IUB is going to decide it. And who decides the IUB? It's Governor Reynolds. And so that's where it's at. And it's been weird because there is so much power in the IUB, but I've been on 3 bills that has stripped power away from the IUB this cycle. In my overall, just with the utilities and everything, when we allow them to be a monopoly, but in return we ask them to follow the rules of the IUB, but yet we strip those things away. And so that's been one of my frustrations this term. But yeah, I wish there was more. I wish we would know more about what's happening, but ultimately I feel it's in silence, and it's under the IUB, which Governor Reynolds picks.
I don't know, make a point to touch on what Mark just said, and he's absolutely right. And I can give you a couple examples. Craig and I have one constituent who has a natural gas line running under his ground. They detected a problem, so they ran what's called a PIG, which is a sensor, remote control sensor. They run it through the pipe to see what the problem is. Well, the pig got stuck, so they had to dig up his field, to fix the pipeline. Well, they didn't put the strata of the soil back where it should be, so he's got rocks and sand laying on top of what was black ground. They're not gonna come back and fix that. He says, I'm not even gonna bother calling, because it doesn't do me any good. I've got a neighbor who has the great big transmission towers, runs across his property. And they come out and do maintenance, and they'll leave a hole in the ground, leave them on the dirt. He's got a farm around it. He picks up the phone, oh yeah, we'll get right on it. 2 years later, the hole's still there. And I had this conversation literally this morning and yesterday with an Invenergy representative and with a representative of Mid-American Energy. I says, there's the promise you guys make today to the landowner. And then there's what happens 25 years from now when Dad had the promise made to him. He passed his ground along to the son, and now the son can't get his inherited land fixed because he left a trench like you're saying, or rocks on top of the ground like our constituent, or a hole in the ground like my neighbor. There's nothing you can do about it because they'll always have a better lawyer and more money than you'll have, and they don't give a damn. I've had this conversation with the new Attorney General, and she seemed receptive to something being done, but I would ask you folks, and you're not gonna get it done this session, obviously, but could you look into what it would take to put some teeth so that the state can come in and say, Mid-American, you're gonna fix this guy's ground or whatever, or the trench in the field, and you're gonna do it now, or we're gonna take action against you. Because our landowners, it's the state's job to protect our landowners. It just is.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm a livestock producer as well, and we're under such immense, scrutiny, whether it's water quality, soil, all this kind of stuff, and yet these companies, a lot of them from out of state, come in and really just do whatever they want, leave us holding the bag, and just like he said, we don't have the money to fight these, and I think there was even some legislation that farmers or landowners couldn't pool together, that they had to do all these claims individually. What the heck is that about? There's some things that you guys could do that could hold these people accountable, and we pride ourselves in Iowa of being an agricultural state, and we pride ourselves on our fertile land and what we can do with the productivity of this land. We should not let somebody else come in and destroy it and then leave the people that are there every day holding the bag. That's just really malfeasant.
Can the IUB board be expanded from 3 people? That seems like a lot of responsibility for 3 people.
It needs to be 7 or 9. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
That should be a pretty simple.
But if the governor picks all 9 or all 7, it
Well,
kind of
that has
negates
to be
that.
party balance.
Okay.
Well, regardless, if the Democrat, I think the current chair is a Democrat. If she goes off, then the Governor Reynolds will have to pick a Democrat to take her place.
And can they be picked in a rotation so that you serve, I don't care, a 12-year term, and a governor only gets picked 3 a year?
I mean, any way we can depoliticize it. Like,
Yeah.
I feel the same way for the Supreme Court.
Heck, Plymouth County has 5 supervisors.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, 4.5.
While I have some agriculture folks, I just wanted something that's on the radar that I'm looking to work on next session when it comes to farmers' rights. So there's a consent decree that the AG in 2005 came with the meat packers, and they extended it for 10 years. 10 years was up. They did it again. So it ends at 2025, and so we have a new AG's office. Not sure if they're going to renew it, but one of the big things in there is paying attorney's fees for if you have a lawsuit, and that might go away in 2025. So just something I'm looking to work on. I mentioned it to several folks on the other side of the aisle that are very interested in doing something next year. So just want to put that while I have you all here.
Sure.
So thank you.
So we're kind of hearing where your plans are, where ours, our suggestions. It's with the governor. You guys are closer to the governor than we are. Is there anything we should know or can know, or you want to tell us about that process? What's coming potentially next year? What's potentially what would allow you to pass legislation? Anything? She's not watching the live stream. So.
When it comes to passing legislation, I'll pass it down.
I guess being as freshman as I am, I can't really say I can offer a lot on that, but obviously I'm going to be paying attention. We still got this stuff to go that we already talked about, so I'll just keep paying attention and do what I can to weigh in and talk with colleagues and see what influence I can achieve, but maybe Jacob can contribute more on.
Are you asking pipeline specific or just in general? Pipeline, I honestly don't see much happening. I mean, I think the House probably, even if nothing happens this year, the House will probably pass something again next year. Kind of 2 levels. I mean, one, we need to put pressure on the Senate. I mean, keep making it aware, maybe probably not to senators in this area, but keep making senators around the state especially leadership, aware that this is an issue that Iowans really concerned about. And then I think the second step is making that clear to the governor. There's a lot of people that are very concerned about the ethanol industry, and that seems to be driving the narrative, and I think a lot of those concerns are valid, but at the same time, this is a private property eminent domain issue that we need to make sure that we don't get wrong.
So I get another question involving the pipelines is there was this big rupture down in Mississippi that I'm sure some of you are aware of that kind of raised the question, okay, what are we doing on safety on these things? You know, this carbon's going to be pumped, I think, like 3 or whatever times more pressure than a lot of these other pipelines. So it sounds like the feds are in a process of doing a pretty serious review on their safety parameters for carbon pipelines, and they could render some new safety standards in the next year or two. Is there any way that the state legislature could pass an injunction that says, look, you know, I guess if the IUB grants eminent domain, that's fine. I mean, I'm just saying, it's not fine with me, but I'm just saying, okay, but we're gonna put a pause on anything until we get new safety standards out. And then we'll be, because, I mean, you think about it, just to fly in at the last minute and do something that's unsafe when we could come out and say, nope, the wall needs to be 2 times this, or whatever the case may be, is that in the best interest of the people? You know, I would say a hard, definite no. So I guess that's just something, I don't know if that's possible, that the legislature could pass an injunction that says, you know, no permits will be granted until the safety specs have been brought up, you know. So leave it with you.
That was in the original bill that we did before it got amended, was they had to wait until the federal board issued their findings, and that got amended out of it.
Really?
Which I thought was a really good thing. And I think what people need to remember is, in my opinion, this is not a public utility. It's a byproduct of a manufacturing process. And nobody can really tell me how much carbon dioxide is in the air as we speak, and how much do we need to grow crops. And I've asked this question before, and no one has ever answered that question. So that's something else I think we need to do.
Sure. And this is not the only option for sequestration or alternative use for CO2. It isn't. Well, the payoff on these pipelines is said to be less than 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's taxpayer money, because
Right.
when you buy that product, you have absolutely no choice but to pay that fee, and that's not right.
And when we talked, I mentioned on the floor too about ethanol and like next generation, and there's options for navigational fuel,
Jet
plane
fuel.
Yeah, exactly.
Jet fuel.
And so like, let's do some research in that.
Yeah, methanol.
The CO2 is 98% pure that comes out of those ethanol plants,
Yep.
and that's exactly what they need.
Exactly.
So that's the third revenue stream. You've got ethanol, you've got the dry distillers.
DDGs.
You've got DDGs, and now you have methanol, that's the third, on top of the carbon tax credits, so which are in the billions, based on
Speaking of the environmental impact, if you guys want to make counties the bad guy to the governor, go right ahead, because we are, you know, as counties and as supervisors and as budget setters, we are impacted. And I want to give Mark Nair, our county engineer, just a moment, put you on the spot, because I know you've already looked at how this impacts the road system. And, you know, just so you're aware of how something like this would impact the county government's delivery of those services.
We're on the pipelines. Yeah, they'll be crossing 23 of our roads. Of those, we're looking at permitting them. We're not going to allow, as they go through the roads, to cut through any of our paved roads. We have, I can't remember right off the top of my head how many of them are gravel. That's just with Summit. The second pipeline cuts across our county diagonally. Basically, they follow the same point to just south of Bronson, then they diverge. Summit goes north, the Heartland Navigator goes northeast. So there is a potential for a good deal of damage to the roads. That's not counting hauling the equipment, hauling in the pipes. There is heavy road use involved as these projects roll across the county.
So is your plan, Mark, to have a bore under the roads or?
Yeah, we'll require that they bore under all roads that are paved or prepped for paving. We have some roads down in the Port Neal industrial area that are gravel surfaced, but they've been substantially strengthened over the years because of the CF Industries project that was carried on down there. So all those roads will be treated like paved roads with boring required underneath.
They're gonna have to bore under all our roads. And they have to be at least 4 feet under the lowest part of the ditch.
Right.
So that tells you how, if they're capable of doing that, people have to also remember, they can bore under a road, they can bore under your tile lines, and landowners need to keep that in mind before they start getting tiles cut, if they don't think of that when they're signing the contract. So make sure your landowners understand that if they can bore under a road, they can bore under a tile line, or any other utility for that matter.
That's right. We have a lot of utilities, including all the new broadband lines that have been placed in the last few years. We've had extensive investment by Wyattell and a couple of our other companies in putting fiber optic out there to serve our rural residents. And we need to make sure that those are protected as well as these pipelines go through the roadways.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Any other questions for Mark from an engineering perspective? Oh, okay. Mr. Bossman needs to get going soon.
Matthew, there's a
Yes?
lady back there that had a question. Is that okay with you?
That is a concern as well. Both pipelines are looking at passing just north of the interchange. This is a project we're doing for economic development and to open up development in the area south of Sioux City. We have a 6-mile gap between interchanges right now. The county, the state DOT, and the communities of Woodbury County have worked hard to complete a successful interchange justification report process. We're now launching into design of the project, and now we're getting hit with the potential for 2 of these pipelines coming underneath the interstate and being within less than half a mile to the north side. They're both on the north side now, at least. But that's the area that's between Sioux City
Thank you, Mr.
and the
Bossman.
interchange, and Sergeant Bluff and the interchange. These are the areas that are prime for development for those 2 communities. And we could end up with a zone where those 2 are crossing not only the interstate corridor, but also they're crossing through prime development ground and creating an area where they'll have to be very careful about what's being built on top or within whatever the federally determined safety radius is. So that is a significant issue. I had suggested, especially with the second pipeline to come along, that they look at moving south of the interchange, but that was a no-go for them because of some of the properties they've already tied up with easements, is what they had reported to me.
So keep the pressure on to get answers to the questions we all collectively have. I think we're all in agreement here. I think that's, the important point, is that, legislation will come up next year. We appreciate the House doing what they did. Briefly,
Next year will be too late. Hearings start October through January. Next year's session will be too late.
that may be part of the plan, and not our plan, but that's our question.
The question is how many men in this room that are at this table as opposed to major investors in Black Rock. I can tell you that the public citizen is not going to stand up on these pipelines.
Yeah.
And everybody in Des Moines that's been up here takes time where we are disappointed. It's just, you know.
It's not too late this session. There's also the no pipeline bill, no budget. That's been done before on the heartbeat bill.
It is not a public utility.
We're all in agreement about that, I believe. Yes. Okay. Mr. Bittinger?
Yes, I'll finally speak. I believe in the proverb that says even a fool looks wise if he keeps his mouth shut. So anyhow, my question is for the state members here. Who has oversight, governmental oversight or veto of the IUB? Are they a complete entity unto themselves where there is no accountability? Or who can, I'm just ignorant of that. I don't know, and I have not researched that yet. So can you speak to that? Can the House and the Senate have a supermajority override of any decisions?
Maybe you might be the most qualified. As far as I can tell, they are fairly autonomous, but you might.
Yeah, they are autonomous.
Okay.
I mean, they're,
They're a little like the Supreme Court.
yes. I mean, could legislation be made that we could have control over them? Sure.
Are they, maybe this would be, are they bound by the Iowa Supreme Court? Would anything they do fall underneath the jurisdiction of them regarding laws? If they were to outstep the,
I think they're probably a constitutionally mandated board, but you can probably have the power to move it to 7 or 9 or whatever you wish to, would be my guess.
Yeah, well, certainly, I would think, that obviously that's not wrong.
Yeah.
Is it 479B, the legislature has given the IUB the authority, so you guys can take it back. Don't let an oligarchy ruin Iowa's family. It's a three-man oligarchy. We do not live under fascist state, or that's what we've been told. Please remove their power. It's not too late. You gave it to them years ago, you can take it back. Maybe just let them be a board where they do the research that's necessary, but they only come to you guys with recommendations, and you guys are the yay or nay, so that you're accountable to us, we the people.
Our governor's
So you
taken
can do that.
$189,000 from Bruce Rafstetter in the last 5 years. That's significant.
Well, I want to be sensitive of everyone's time, and I know that you can probably all connect afterwards as well. We're on the same page here as local governments. You know, the issue is all the way up top. But I know some have already left. We've spoken our piece. From a state legislation standpoint, do you have any updates for us on interesting bills, good bills, bad bills, things for us to be aware of? Any questions for us while we're all mostly here?
Yeah, there really isn't. I mean, there's bills that are being worked through appropriations and ways and means, and then, of course, standings. So, it just got, I mean, I hate to say that, but it's just, you know, it remains to be seen what ends up ultimately coming before the debate floor or not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is that it? Great chair of natural resources.
How much did Pam pay you?
Supervisors, anything else?
We appreciate you doing this for us, man.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank everyone, really, again. This is extraordinary. I don't think, well, obviously, my 9 years, it doesn't happen. Takes a lot to cobble together things. And thank you to our building services and IT department for setting this up, cobbling this together for us. It's not a round table, literally, but it worked. I think it worked really well. So, you know our county staff. You can get a hold of them through us. If you have any questions on Senate File 550 and specific concerns. Dennis will have some handouts for you and be able to talk through some stuff. Everyone here is willing, I'm sure you can get their information and speak further with them. But, this was a great opportunity for the public to see what it looks like. I know you have meetings sort of like this with school districts and with counties. I think, again, the most fundamental aspect of government is what we provide. And so we thank you for, being cognizant of that and working for all of our interests. All right?
Thank you.
Everyone have a safe drive home. Thank you.